This show is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised.
It's the Hello Humans podcast, and it's Behind the Songs with The Rambling Man, a weekly series where we're going to talk about the music that defined Generation X. So subscribe, hit that like button, hit that bell, and let's get ready for the show. Let's go down memory lane. Hello, humans, and welcome to another episode of Behind the MTV Music Years. That's right, it's 1982. 1982. We're still there, guys. We barely touched the surface. And for this, I have to introduce the pillar of the show, the man that has over 20 years experience in the retail music business, and he was there for all of it. Let me introduce the star of the show. It's the Rambling Man. Sir, how are you? How have you been?
I'm very good. When you said I'm the pillar of the show,
You
more
are.
More like the pillow, because people fall asleep to the Rambling Man again this week.
You know what? It's the purpose to have a conversation. I don't know about you, right? But I can tell you from experience that sometimes I just want to listen to something. I don't want to hear people fighting. I don't want to hear arguing. I'm tired of hearing about politics. In every single video, somebody has to bring something up that has to do with politics. Sometimes I just need to relax, hear a conversation between two people, and just sip my coffee. That's really what the show's about. People in the morning, waking up in the morning, having a cup of coffee, maybe listening to work at night. Just making the time go by. When I was working long shift hours, especially night shift, I always had, podcasts, playing in the background, especially things that interest us. And this particular experience is something that very few people have, and very few people get to share nowadays. And it's a great introduction for younger people to know what was going on back in the day. And you, sir, were right in the center of the storm, if you will.
Well, when you said you don't like infighting and back and forth and politics, I thought you were talking about my first two marriages there for a minute. But, carry on. I was getting flashbacks there for a minute.
All right, sir. Let me describe 1982 for me. Right?
Yeah.
In growing up in Los Angeles, there was a lot of pop music on the radio. It was mostly dominated by what today probably would be called adult contemporary, because they had the purchasing power. So, even people that were going to the clubs at that point tended to be older, right? Because they had the money and they had the wherewithal. So you had, like the number one hits were by like Air Supply, Ray Parker Jr.
Yeah.
Things that were completely pop. I remember John Cougar came out that year with Jack and Diane, Hurt So Good.
Yeah.
That was clearly what dominated the charts. But for us, that was something that older people listened to. So when this year began, we were mostly listening to heavy metal. We were listening to, things like, Aldo Nova, I remember, came out that year. And Van Halen was always a staple up to that point, for me and for others. Iron Maiden, 666, the number of the beast, was huge, but something started to change that year. We heard a new sound,
right?
And that's what we're talking about here. What do you remember about 1982?
1982. Well, 1982 was the year I started as a Saturday boy. We talked about that last week. Saturday boy in a record store.
Uh-huh.
But I would do anything and everything. I was such a little gutter snipe when I was young. Anything that I could do to earn a bit of money so I could go either to the arcade, to the cinema, or to the record store.
Oh,
I would hustle. Those three. I would hustle and whatever it would be. Nothing too illegal, okay. But even at school, my friend was father had like a newsagents where they sold magazines and stuff. And we used to sell those because in the old days, you only had to send the front cover back. If you didn't sell them, you sent the front cover back to the people who published it, and you threw away the rest of the magazine. Okay. and they went in the trash. We pulled them out of the trash and we'd sell them. All sorts of magazines. I'll leave that to your imagination. All right. But for 14-year-old boys to have that sort of resource at school, we made a lot of money.
I bet.
So when you say about purchasing power, I mean, I was turning over money, but I was just spending it. There was no thought of saving for it. It was those three pillars. That's what I was going to do on my weekend. I would work hard at school. I would work hard at hustling. I would do anything that I could for a bit of money just to go and do those three things. So, yeah, I started in a record store. 1982 for me. Do you know when you said 1982? Immediately what I thought of was Tron. That was the biggest thing in my year. I was obsessed by it. Right, the movie Tron.
Yes.
And why I was obsessed with it, I said, last week about just these things coming together. Well, obviously, I love cinema.
Mm-hmm.
I must have seen Tron at the cinema maybe 8 or 9 times when I was a kid. I could go to the arcade. I could play Tron the arcade game, which is an amazing arcade game.
Oh, yeah.
We had home console versions of these things coming out with the Intellivision. And I loved the soundtrack. I bought the soundtrack on album, which I used to do quite a lot of the time with film soundtracks, because back in the day, we're going to talk about MTV now and video and visual media. But before then, we didn't have that. So having the album from a film was about as close as you got to it. You didn't have a video. You didn't have blockbusters at this stage. Video wasn't even a thing yet.
That's right.
Being able to play the game, listen to the soundtrack, I was absolutely obsessed with the thing, and science fiction in general. It's the year of E.T., that kind of stuff. Thing. I never watched The Thing at that age, so I'm only really going to talk about what I did at that age. But you know what I mean? It was yes. Quite a big thing, because it's all about computer games. Something I loved. The music was great. Could play the game,
and it felt very ours. When it came to specifically video games. It's something that a lot of parents couldn't understand.
No,
right? It was ours, and that made our generation different than the previous one.
Absolutely.
It's like a line in the sand. And then you had MTV, and I'm going to start with one of the bands that I listened to first on MTV that up to that point I'd never heard. Right.
Yeah.
And like I told you, at this point, I'm listening to a lot of hard rock, heavy metal. And all of a sudden I listened to a band called The Clash.
Okay. 1982 is a good year for The Clash. Yeah.
Yeah. And it started opening my horizons, right? Because it was more rhythmic and it was just something different, and I remember seeing them on a live, it was a live video that I saw them in, and I saw these fellows, and they look completely different than everything around us, and it started, and I go, where are these guys from? Where'd this come from? And that was one of the bands that started opening my eyes. And then at the same time, and this is what was so great about MTV for us, is that at the same time I listened to The Clash, I remember listening also, or watching, I think it was called Situation by Yaz. Is that correct?
Yazoo, yeah.
Yeah.
Yazoo, yeah.
Yeah.
That was their big, that was from their big album that year. Absolutely, yeah.
And they're so completely different.
Yes.
Right. So before that, my music taste was kind of monolithic. I knew I didn't want to listen to just pop stuff all the time. So I was ingrained in this, metal, heavy metal type stuff. And then I listened to The Clash, and I listened to this British music and to Yazoo, and boom. Now I knew I could listen to different things, and I enjoyed them both. Yeah. I was intrigued by them.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's what those are two that I remember.
I mean, they both had big albums that year. I mean, you had Combat Rock by the Clash, which, for all intents and purposes, was their last album together. Mm-hmm. Well, it was their last album together. There was another album after that, but it only had Joe Strummer. Everybody else had left the band at that point. So that was really, they went massive in America with Combat Rock. Should I Stay or Should I Go was, top single. But the Clash actually were I think we talked about it last time, where you can start liking a band and then you can offshoot thinking, well, I like that. Who are they influenced by? Let me go and have let me have a read. Let me have a think about what they're influenced by, because the Clash went through lots of stages. That was probably their rockiest album. The one before that was a triple album, right, called Sandinista, okay? And it was very heavily influenced by Latino music, reggae music, and it was sprawling, 3 records. It was fantastic.
Wow.
And had a song called The Magnificent Seven on it, which was their take on hip hop, because they were in New York right at the time when very early hip hop was taking root, you know. And they heard this. They were in New York. They heard it. So they recorded it out there. Now you'll probably hear it and go, "Nah, it's not really rap." Well, it isn't, but it was heavily influenced, and they were heavily influenced by rap, reggae, Latino music. So they were really cosmopolitan. So that's a band, if you look at them, you think, right, they're quite rock. But actually, if you go a little bit back further, they've got such a deep history. So
yeah, one of the things that you said there, and you know, these are the great things about this conversation, because as we get older, our memory is not as fresh as they used to be. But I just got a flash when you said that, because, you know, for us, the biggest records here were Rock the Casbah, and like you said, Should I Stay or Should I Go Now? But in Should I Stay or Should I Go Now, there's a line in Spanish there.
Yes.
Right? So then the heavy metal kids, right, at this point, and I'm just speaking about my area, guys. It's not for the whole country. I'm not speaking for the whole U.S. I'm just talking about the kids in our neighborhood, in our high schools. But with that, these guys were rocking and singing in Spanish. That's something you would never hear in heavy metal.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So
at that time, anyway. Yeah.
At that time. Yeah. So now you have these kids, Hispanic kids, they are learning to play instruments, and now they hear this and they say, I can rock too. Yeah. And, you know, that was one of the first movements towards alternative music that we call here, for Hispanics.
Yeah. I could definitely see that. I mean, you know, that had some Spanish on it, some Arabic on it. It was they're a very inclusive band. Their reggae stuff is absolutely brilliant, really good. I mean, they went to Jamaica, they got proper reggae dub producers, and they treated it seriously. So they were a great band. And Yazoo had that was their first album in 1982, Upstairs at Eric's. So Situation was a track off of that. And that's, again, we talked about 12-inch singles last week, if you remember rightly. The 12-inch of Situation is absolutely, it's a great tune. And 12-inch singles were really coming into their own at that point, you know, extended mixes. I mean, that's, again, something, you know, people say, oh, well, you know, prog rock artists had 20-minute tracks on their albums. Yeah, they did. But to take a 4-minute song and then expand it out to 8, 10, 12 minutes was an art form in itself. And 1982 was a big year for the 12-inch single, to be fair. And Yazoo were at the forefront of that, definitely.
Yeah, you know, we had some bands over here that, like you said, they weren't really big over there, but they kind of became popular here. You know, whether it's Flock of Seagulls or like Thomas Dolby was big. But I remember one record. There was a couple of records that really stood out for me because they were so different than the stuff we were hearing. And one of the bands that I remember that really had an impact in the Hispanic community, and I want to say two. One of them was the Psychedelic Furs, and the other one was In Excess.
Okay. Yeah, Psychedelic Furs is another one of those bands that were much bigger in America than they ever were in the UK, even though they were a UK band. Mm-hmm. I love the Psychedelic Furs. I've seen them live quite a few times, but they never really did much over here, which is strange, isn't it? It's like the Flock of Seagulls never really did anything over here.
Yeah.
And In Excess were massive over here. I mean, they're an Aussie band from Australia, but they were massive over here.
Yeah. I remember that song "Don't Change." Oh my gosh, I used to play that song for like an hour just in repeat.
But it's interesting you say about Thomas Dolby, because again, I picked 5 albums for my top 5 albums of 1982, and Thomas Dolby, which people are going, who?
You know, so, well, once you say
he was great. He was great.
with science, yeah.
Well, again, you know, he's a fascinating character because that was a great album. She Blinded Me with Science. There's loads of good tunes on that. One of Our Submarines is Missing. If you haven't heard that track, give that track a listen to. It's evocative. It's about his grandfather in World War II actually being in a submarine that was sinking.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite deep, but it's very poppy, right? But he was probably better known for his production stuff. And again, this is what always gets me about music, because Thomas Dolby, English, synth pop, you could leave it there. But no, Thomas Dolby, we were talking about the clash in hip hop. Thomas Dolby then went on to produce, in 1982, hip hop albums and singles for bands. So I don't know if you can remember a song called Magic One by Houdini.
I remember Houdini. Yes.
Houdini is the rap group. Magic One was a really big single in both sides of the state. Co-written and produced by Thomas Dolby.
I didn't know.
You wouldn't know that, would you? You wouldn't even think about it. But he had a completely separate life as a kind of a dance and a hip hop very early producer in hip hop, obviously. But that's the great thing about music. Like I said, it just goes off on such weird tangents.
Yeah, because I'm pulling it up now. You know, as I'm looking at the video, I remember him wearing the hat. That's what I remember of that video.
Yeah. But he probably made more money out of the Houdini track because he co-wrote it, and it was a massive hit both sides of the Atlantic. So he's a great artist. He still knocks about. He's still making music, but I mean, obviously not to the.
I mean, She Blinded Me with Science was huge over here. I mean, really huge. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that whole album was big. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the, you know, as we're talking, one of the bands that we saw that we liked, but we couldn't quite put a finger on it why we liked it. But I don't know if you remember a song that was called Senses Working Overtime by XTC.
Oh, good God. Right. Shall I strike that off my list? That's number 4 on my list. Okay.
Oh, my gosh.
They had an album out that year as well. But yeah, XTC were, again, XTC went quite long. I mean, they were making music up to the mid-2000s. But yeah, they were quite quirky, weren't they? Sort of quirky guitar pop, but
yeah,
they didn't really have that. They didn't really have a place, to be honest. So that was what was great about them. They weren't indie, they weren't rock, but they did their own thing, really. XTC, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that was so great for us because, you know, I just listen to the mix that I'm showing you right now. It's not something that we would get on the radio, right? This is not stuff that we would have had access to, you know, easily. Like you would have to know about music, go into the record shop and say, oh, you know, can I see something from, you know, somewhere else? For us, like new wave, what they used to call new wave was like Missing Persons, you know, that type of band. But, you know, I remember we talked about Simple Minds, and I remember, I think,
number 2 on my list. You're going to cross number 2 off my list now.
Promised a Miracle, I remember, was a song that was on there. Yeah. I mean, they had a massive that year again. They hadn't really they did cross over to America an album later, really. But the album that you're going on about, I'm just trying to think. New Gold Dream, that was the name of the album. Yeah, again, that was quite synth based as well. There was quite a lot of synth in that. And like I said to you last week when we talked about them, they did start off quite dancey with the Kraftwerk influences that we talked about, and that again, and that's on my top 5. So you've crossed three of my top 5 off already before we go any further. But 1982 was a bit of a strange year, really, because it seemed to be the end of. It wasn't really the end of an era, but it was the end for quite a few bands that you probably started hearing for the first time, like The Clash. Whereas they were like five albums in by that stage. You were sort of 2 years behind what new wave was for us at that point. So it was quite an interesting year because that was the last Clash album. Flock of Seagulls, I think that was their last real proper album in 82.
bands like Debo that were new wave. That were, I mean, I don't know. Again, if you haven't heard Debo, American band. Yeah, I mean, great. That was probably their that was probably their peak. So there was a lot of punk new wave bands probably coming into the end of their life cycle, and a lot of new bands starting that cycle, like Depeche Mode, Yazoo. You know, some of the stuff you were saying about before.
And then there was there's also that track "Don't Go." Was that Yaz or Yazoo?
That's Yazoo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me give you one that's been very influential in my life, and we've been talking about this before. And it was a nice transition between the heavy metal, right, and this British music, and it was Billy Idol "White Wedding." You know, Billy Idol is a person that is beloved in the United States.
Yeah.
Right. He is an icon.
Yeah.
I actually saw him open up for Morrissey at the Hollywood Bowl.
Yeah.
Just such a great show.
Yeah.
But what I told you is he was my go-to in karaoke. And let me tell you, Gen Xers out there, if you become single again for whatever reason, you go, and I'm telling you this right now, you go to the karaoke bar, right? And you learn yourself some Dancing with Myself. Ooh, maybe you want to close it up with Rebel Yell. And if you can't close the deal, you're probably not alive.
Did you have to rock the leather trousers at the same time?
Oh, you can wear anything. You know, the nerdier you look, the better. You know, the nerdier you look, the better. But I love Billy Idol.
Again,
you know,
he's
that White Wedding. Yeah, that White Wedding video was iconic here.
Yeah. Again, he's probably more beloved in the States than he is over here. Not that he's not well known over here. Yeah, he totally is. Mm-hmm. But I think he spent the last sort of 30 years in the States. He doesn't come back here very often. That album, the Billy Idol, it was just called Billy Idol that year. I mean, that was a big album. Yeah, it was a big album over here. But that was it. He sort of came and went as Billy Idol. Obviously, he was in Generation X before that, which were a punk band.
Yes.
And again, they weren't seen as sort of hardcore punks. They were sort of on the periphery a little bit. I mean, I like Generation X, I like Billy Idol, but I've never done karaoke. But I will give it a try. We've got next week's Grab a Granny. I'll try and get the karaoke going for next week. Yeah.
I'm telling you, people at first people are shy, but once the alcohol hits, everything becomes funner. Oh. And let me give you one that's kind of out there. This is a song, right, that a couple of my friends I enjoyed, but we would listen to it by ourselves because it's one of those songs that you can have people catch you listening to it. And it was called Stepping Out by Joe Jackson. It was so different.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a poppy tune. I don't know. He had like an influence of the 40s or the 20s. I can't remember the video. Yeah. But it was that kind of more jazzy sound, I guess. I don't even know how to categorize.
Yeah, it's quite a noir video for that, I think, wasn't it, really? Yeah. Not somebody I really particularly... But it's quite interesting. You got into English bands and English music in 1982.
Yeah. And
I went the other way. I stepped across the Atlantic. Not with some of the acts that you talk about. But 1982 for me was not really about albums. So I've got 5 albums that I adore, that I listened to then non-stop, that I still listen to non-stop now. But it was more about the 12-inch single for me in 1982. And electro music mainly. And I would just consume it in stupid amounts. If something came across the pond on a white label 12-inch or what have you, I bought it without listening to it. That's why I needed all that money, because I was just absolutely... So it came out of that Kraftwerk thing we were talking about last week. So we're talking about bands like Africa Bambaataa. We're talking things like Rockers of Revenge, Walking on Sunshine. Do you remember that tune? Great tune. Bambaataa, Planet Rock, Man Parish.
Planet Rock, yeah.
Man Parish, Hip Hop, Beat Bop, all that kind of stuff.
Even though those came out in 1982, I have to tell you that the popularity of the music that you're talking about here in the States started hitting in late '84 and
Yeah.
1985 here.
I think, and this happens quite a lot actually. We give you something from Europe or the UK.
Mhm.
You totally transform it and you give it back to us, and we love it.
Yeah, and
we'll go further on in dance music. We'll talk about house music and techno. I mean, that came from us. So if you've bought the first early techno albums, all the artists would say, yeah, love Depeche Mode, love Kraftwerk, love New Order, love people like that, love Yazoo.
yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. I'll give you a perfect example. There was a group called Lime with "Babe, We're Gonna Love Tonight."
Right.
It came out in 1982.
Yeah.
But it really hit big in Los Angeles in 1985.
Yeah.
Right? That's when it was popping over here. And the 12-inch single that's when, we started buying 12-inch records here and started DJing. Like that was like a hobby, that you would have, and you would throw party and stuff like that. So, we were quite a ways, behind you guys, but, and, there was music like, for example, Joe Jackson stuff that you would listen to, not tell anybody, but another band that, you talk about people being brave right now. Being brave was being Boy George in 1982. Right. Yeah. If you nobody could say openly in my neighborhood that you like Boy George without physical consequences. Right.
Right.
And
it was quite similar over here. It wasn't too different over here, to be honest. Right.
But let me tell you, it was a great album. It was a great album in the fact that you can listen to it with your girlfriend. She would put it on. I mean, again, I'll tell you another closer, guys, for karaoke, right? Go with either Karma Chameleon or Time Clock of the Heart.
Right. That's a strange one.
Yeah, if you go with those guys.
I know the song, but it wasn't a.
It wasn't a big hit.
It wasn't a hit at all.
But especially people from the '80s, ladies that enjoy that kind of music back in the day, really like that one. Really, really like that one. But
it wasn't too dissimilar over here. I mean, he was a phenomena for what he. I mean, like you said, brave is not. It doesn't even. It's not. You can't even describe how brave he was, and the whole band were, really. To be fair, and it caused probably the same amount of stir, but really quickly. I mean, I think after the first video, probably maybe the second video, a bit, but we just got used to him because I guess the UK's got a tradition of kind of drag artists as comedians, quite mainstream comedians. So we kind of had that man dressing as a woman kind of thing, but in a comedy context. And he was quite funny as well. I mean, he still is funny. Right as we speak, he's on the British I'm a Celebrity, Can You Get Me Out of Here? I don't know. You have that in the States, and I don't know if you watch it. But he's in a jungle. He's in a jungle for 6 weeks. So they have other people. They have hardly any food. They have to do challenges to get food. And he's quite cranky. Okay. And he hasn't got his makeup and all that kind of stuff. So he is hilariously funny. So that sort of came and went after that. And it was just all down to the music. But yeah, the first track and the first video, everybody was like, well, what the hell's going on? And my mum and dad were like, well, what's going on there? And I would say, well, he's just like so-and-so, the comedian.
Yeah.
Okay. I get that.
Yeah, no, he's beloved here in the US. He really is.
He's a naughty boy, but he's
He had his issues, but
he's had his struggles.
Yeah. He's like that one cousin that you have that screws up, but you love him. He's gonna come back at some point. As a personality, I love him. I was never really into the music. I've got to admit, I'm never really into the music. As a personality, he's always been, like I said, apart from that first month or two, then people just took to him straight away. And he is pretty beloved. Like I said, he's on that. He's getting paid $500,000 to be on that TV program that he's currently on, and he's worth every penny. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I totally cross over to your side of the street with And I guess I was quite an early adopter to some of that stuff, that dance music. But it was quite weird because, you know, you've got to go back in time, cast your mind back, and I'm just thinking about me. Now, I had come from and was still in quite an indie boy scene. Okay, so some of the bands I like. So I'm wearing like a big grey overcoat, you know, and boots, and I've got like a blonde wedge, right? But I'm going in and buying hip hop and electro 12 inches. So that's what got me into the record store in the first place, because I was buying stuff and they were going, "What's this kid buying that for?" You know, he's coming in, he's dressed like that, but he's listening to that. This kid's got some eclectic taste. Let's get him in, and that's really how it first started. It really was. And then I started, you know, buying the stuff in for the store, and that was just great. I mean, that was good. Reps would come around and say, "Do you want to listen to this? Do you want a 12-inch of that? Do you want a white label of that?" And I'm like, "Yes." we'll do all of that. Would you like tickets for this? I would. Thank you very much. Yeah. But yeah, so that was the year. I was totally not American. I can't even really, apart from my parents' influence on Americanized, I didn't up until 1982 have any American references at all. Apart from, you know, I knew my mum listened to Motown, and she liked Tony Bennett and Frank Sinatra. So yeah, I heard it, but it was never my music. My music was very English up until 1982, and then I just went bang. I didn't forget British music. It's just I then got involved with American music a lot more.
Yeah, we started getting excited with British music too, as far as some of the pop stuff. And you know, we called it pop stuff over here, but it's like you said, Adam Ant started doing, you know, did some great punk records. But I remember Goody Two Shoes were very popular over here, right? But that was sort of our entry point. But the one thing that had another band that has a real connection with the Hispanic community here, and I'm telling you, it's huge, just as big as the Smiths, and that is The Cure. And the first time we listened to "Let's Go to Bed," it was like, what is this? Where has this been? You know, it was a change. I mean, we had seen Susie and the Banshees, and now we had, you know, this group over here that was completely different. There was nothing. For example, we still had a jukebox at the place where we used to have breakfast.
Yeah.
And I remember us, you know, having a breakfast there, you know, and we would play video games before going to school.
Yeah.
And somebody put this on, and everybody was like, "What is that? What's going on here?" It was so different, you know, and from then on, The Cure just stuck.
82, 83 was when The Cure really did kind of metamorphosize a little bit. I mean, they were quite, again, if you look at early Cure on YouTube, now I was too young to see them at that point, but you go back and look at them now, you know, he had no makeup on, just had normal hair.
Yeah.
They were quite punk.
Yes.
Some of their older songs that were in their very infant stage then, and they were like 3-minute songs. Like, just bash them out as quick past 3-minute songs.
From what I heard, his stint with Susie and the Banshees left quite an impression on
him. Absolutely. But you've got to think, Susie and the Banshees, you had a lot of, I mean, certainly in the early days of Susie, you had so many people from punk that went on, he being one of them. Marco, who was the original guitarist, he went on to be one of the Ants, you know, as in Adam and the Ants. He was the lead guitar player, the big guy. You even had Sid Vicious was playing drums for them at one point, right? So they were, and a lot of people came out of that band that only stayed for maybe 2 or 3 months and then shot off and did their own thing. And Robert Smith was definitely one of those. But yeah, they were just changing at that point. They were becoming The Cure. I think they were too much like other bands. But you know, that song you're talking about, that's when they really started coming out themselves and become The Cure and were their own thing. Before that, they were a little bit derivative. But yeah, certainly at that point, and obviously they've gone on to have such an amazing career anyway.
One band that I talked about, and I don't know how it was received over there, but one band that would regularly play over here was the English Beat. How was the
Yeah, you
English Beat
said.
over there? Yeah.
Yeah, well, that came out. I mean, that comes. We sort of touched on that. That came out of a thing. Interesting. Before we came on, we were talking about a little bit about growing up and our youth and what have you. And I think I said last time that I sort of came up in a very urban cosmopolitan area where there was a strong mix of sort of Afro-Caribbean, Jamaican music in the mix. And I think that, that was reflected in people like The Beat, because that's primarily sort of reggae driven, ska driven to an extent. And then you had Madness. They were exactly the same. Yeah. My favorite were the Specials.
The Specials.
The Specials were amazing. They still are. I went to see them about 5 years ago, and they were still absolutely brilliant. So yeah, that's another. Again, that's not something. I mean, the ska movement came out of a lot of sort of Afro-Caribbeans coming over in the 50s and the 60s, bringing their music over, and that just sort of ingraining it. I love ska, and so that whole movement with the Beat, Madness, Selector, the Specials, it was massive over here.
I remember,
massive.
Probably the difference with the Beat is that it got some radio play. I remember there was a song. I think it was called "I Confess."
Yeah.
Because Hispanics tend to be very romantic, so whenever a lot of kids would get a chance to go on radio through public service or at the colleges, they would slip in these songs that you probably couldn't hear, in top 40 stations and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And more and more this English music started coming on. There were staples of videos that were on MTV. Red Skies at Night by The Fix, for example, was something that played over and over again. It was completely different than anything you would ever see or hear.
But that's the thing, though, isn't it? Because we would get a European version of MTV. Okay, so you were being introduced to a lot of English bands. Conversely, we were being introduced to a lot of American bands.
I see.
So it really did work in the opposite way. So, I mean, we didn't get your MTV. We had MTV, and if you'd have come over, it had looked like your MTV, but it was programmed completely differently. So that's when I started really getting into the American stuff, was through MTV, and conversely, you were getting into the English stuff because it was the other way around.
What do you remember about American music during 1982? Like, what is it that you were listening to back then, besides the electronic stuff?
It purely was the electronic stuff, really. I was never really into AOR, as we used to call it over here, adult orientated rock, which is something like the stuff you were sort of talking about in those days. I've grown to like it now, but it wasn't my kind of thing. So really, the first time, I know you mentioned Jack and Diane last week, and now the way I kind of like that tune was, again, going off in a completely different tangent, about, I think it was 1986. It was used in, and I'll send you the link for this one because I sent you some links last week. It was, the main guitar line was used in a remix for an Eric B. and Rakim single, right?
Yes,
and that makes you think, oh, where did that come from? And then you go and, oh, it's him. Right, let me have a listen to that. I quite like that. Right? Yeah. I wouldn't have listened to that before, but because inquisitive minds think, well, if that guy who remixed it, he was obviously into hip hop, he likes it, then maybe I could like that too,
Yeah, I mean, it's just that the music at that time, look, if I listen to it now, I'll listen to it sort of like nostalgically. It's not that I it's not that I have to turn it off when I hear it. But back in the day, it's really not anything that really captured our hearts. I mean, you're talking about stuff like Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson type stuff, or you had the Steve Miller Band, or Chicago. Hard to say. I'm sorry, not that that they're not great songs. Quarter Flash had a song I remember, "Harden My Heart," but that's something that my neighbor lady with 2 kids was singing, right? And that was, a big hit. Well, I didn't want to listen to that.
No, it didn't. It didn't capture anybody's imagination of my generation. All of my friends, again, like I said, there were kind of certain, if you were into ska, that was one thing. If you were into sort of mod music like the Jam, that kind of stuff, we all had our sort of little cliques, really. And that's what was frustrating for me, because they didn't want to step out of their little clique. They didn't want to think about other things that might have been to their taste, but it wasn't cool for them to like that band. It wasn't, I'm not going to like that because I'm with the mods, or I'm with the ska guys, or whatever, or I'm punk. So I think the thing about me is, and I think and a few of my friends, we just try to open ourselves, be a bit more open to it. But I will admit to you now, it took me a very long time to get into any kind of American AOR. However, as you mature and you listen to things, your taste change. But if you were asking me, did I listen to that in 1982? No, the radio would have gone off. If I was listening to the top 40 in Chicago came on, right, I would go and do something while that was on. I won't tell a lie. No, I mean, I was into completely different things.
Yeah, it was just that it was so dominated by middle-aged artists.
Yeah.
Right. And even if you as a kid, you're looking at this person that looks like your uncle or looks like your dad, whether it's where they had that one guy, they had like Neil Diamond on the air. They had Michael McDonald. He was
nothing wrong with a bit of Michael McDonald. I quite like Michael McDonald now.
But back in the day, he was with the Doobie Brothers, right? But then you're looking at Michael McDonald against Billy Idol, and if you're a young kid, I mean, where are you going to go?
It wasn't exciting, was it?
Yeah, no, you're not going to choose him over Adam Ant.
You say that, but one of the biggest selling singles of 1982 over here was "Eye of the Tiger" by Survivor. Right? Yeah. But to be fair, I mean, that was it. That was more like of a one-off thing over here. American AOR rock wasn't. It was all about young people, and like I said to you last time, it always felt that you could do it yourself. It's not something that was so far away that you couldn't put your finger on it. And that's why electro music. That's why I started to get into that, because hip hop, electro music. Like I said, I kind of missed out on punk. So my punk that I could do stuff myself. 1982 was kind of the start of because if you want to go down that route later, I did become I was a DJ. I did DJ in nightclubs and stuff as a spare time thing. And that was 1982 was the start of my hip hop, but that was more American based. Not that I took my eye off the ball with the English stuff, but the radio was just not dominated by that kind of stuff over here. I mean, I don't know why, but it wasn't. It really wasn't. You had your fans of it, obviously, but I mean, I think if we went through the top 50 top selling singles of that time, you probably only find a handful of American artists, and of those American artists outside of things like Jackson 5 or Michael Jackson or whatever would, Survivor was the only one that year. I think the Jay Giles band. I remember that year.
Jay Giles band,
Centerfold. Steve Miller. I remember Abracadabra.
One of the things that started happening is as kids we started rebelling, because even the music that was once edgy, like had Foreigner like doing like romantic stuff. When they were doing rock and roll before, they were doing I think it was called A Girl Like You or something like that. And even the R&B music that was up there was becoming a little too pop, so that then people didn't want to listen to that. You'd rather listen to techno or pop, and it's not that Ray Parker Jr. is not a good musician, right? Or George Benson, but it's too commercial.
But it didn't matter to anybody that they were great musicians, really. Yeah. It wasn't about the musicianship. If you were a punk, you didn't care if you could play the guitar, right? If you made a noise, that was great. Electro music and hip hop, I don't think it was about how good a musician you were. Certainly in the early days, I think it became maybe something a bit later on in life. But I think what you referred to later, I think being into the J Giles band or Steve Miller band wouldn't get you laid. Simply, yeah.
Well,
I can't imagine at 14 and 15. We were going into we had kind of youth club. Fridays and Saturdays would have youth club discos and sound. And if you went in and asked for the Steve Miller band, you just get out, will you? Wait, who's that? Get out, right? We don't want you in here. Get out. So it wouldn't get you laid, so you wouldn't listen to it even if you wanted to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because again, it'd be something like your dad might have on the radio while you're driving around.
Yeah.
So it's not you're going to play that at a party. I don't think so. I don't think so. But
the other thing about 1982 is when I first started going to gigs. And remarkably, even though my mum and dad were pretty conservative, should we say, not in politics, but they were quite they weren't strict, but they'd actually let me go to gigs at 14 and 15. And I feel so sorry for young kids today because ticket prices are obscene.
Yeah.
To go and see your favorite band or your favorite singer, it costs the earth. I could go and see two really good bands for the equivalent of $1, a quid 50. And that's it. I can listen to music all night, two bands, get wasted, probably get laid because, again, big hint, go to a gig.
Yeah,
you probably will end up meeting people. It's a great place to meet people, and that's when I first started seeing people live, which is again just a different. We could talk about music all day, but live music is a completely different beast.
Yes,
from recorded music.
Absolutely,
it really is. So that again, 1982 for me was great because I went to some early gigs. I remember vividly going to see the Jam with Paul Weller, and that was just mental. It was you could only get sort of 300 people in the room, and it was just heaving. And I'm 14, nearly 15, and it just so exciting,
Yeah. Especially at that age.
Exciting.
I mean, we couldn't. Yeah. You could here. You couldn't dream of doing that. It would have to be some, indie group from a college or just a local band or something like that. You don't get to listen to that much.
Well, we weren't allowed it in the clubs, funnily enough.
Yeah.
But everybody of my age, I always looked slightly older than I was sort of hairy with a beard at 13. Right? I had quite a lot of facial hair going on. I always looked older, and I could always seem to get people into things. I could go into pubs at 15 quite easy and start drinking. But we weren't allowed into clubs. Clubs over here were quite harsh with that. Nothing like it was over there. I mean, I've been to the States, and even when I was 21 and I looked 30, I was getting ID'd all over the place. It just didn't happen over here. Wow. So at 15, you could Friday, Saturday night, easily go out and see a band, two good bands, a support band, a main band, a quid 50, two quid if it was a really big band. It was nothing. Really was nothing. Now you've got to pay top dollar to go and see anybody these days. It's so sad.
Yeah, and most of it doesn't even go to the artist. You're paying fees, you're paying taxes, you're paying all this stuff, and it's insane. It's really, really insane. And then you have the resellers. Well, let me ask you this.
It wasn't a thing. Resellers weren't a thing. You had what we call ticket touts. So you'd see them all the time. If it was a sold out gig, they'd somehow get tickets and they'd be outside going, do you want a ticket or do you want to sell a ticket? So it's really quite, basic sort of, and I would say to earn some money sometimes. I used to do that as well. Not technically legal, but buying a ticket and selling it on. If people want to go in, it's last minute. You're going to pay over the odds. But even then, it would be nothing like what kids have got to pay these days. They just couldn't do it.
Let me tell you, I want to summarize here what 1982 meant for me musically, right?
Yeah.
1982 for me was the year that opened, my mind to different kinds of music. It opened my mind to the fact that I could enjoy different styles of music, right? And I started looking at creativity. I mean, it was fairly young, right? But
Yeah.
I was starting to recognize talent. I was starting to pay attention more to the lyrics, right, of what was being said. And it was just a very exciting time. Like you said, you were talking about the video games. We're talking about video games. We're talking about music that's completely different. We're talking about MTV, and that's where we started forming our own identity, right? That was quite different than the generation before. For us, even more because we were Hispanic,
Yeah.
And one of the reasons a lot of these bands were appealing to us is because we didn't feel that we belonged either way. We weren't Spanish enough to belong to our countries. Doesn't matter what country you came from. If you were born here, they consider you an American, right? And you see a lot of people in the U.S. nowadays. It wasn't like this before, but nowadays they say I'm this American or this type of American or that type of American. Let me tell you, when you leave the country, you're American, right?
Yeah.
They don't classify you by race. They classify you by your passport. But even if you belong to a minority, even the minorities themselves tell you you're not really, Mexican, or you're not really Cuban, or you're not really this, because you weren't born there. So you're kind of left in this limbo of what the hell am I?
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you what I am. I'm a fan of The Cure. I'm a fan of British music. I'm a fan of the Smiths.
You are.
I'm a Generation X gamer, Generation X folk. So that's what I remember of 1982, starting to create my own identity that had nothing to do with, what previously had happened. What about you?
Big thing about 1982 was it's the first my first sexual experience, shall we say, in 1982.
Oh, yes.
So that's probably my biggest memory. Christmas of 1982, not Christmas Day, but around that time. Purely working out the record store. Do you know what? At that point, it really didn't matter what was playing at the time. I've never been one to have kind of music around me. If it's around me, it's fine. But I don't need to I don't kind of have that to sort of get me in the mood. But that was my biggest memory. Like I said, I was just obsessed with just those three things. Music, cinema, games.
Yeah,
it was all consuming, right?
You beat me.
Yeah,
by
but
2
I did
years.
I did work in a record store, so it was pretty easy, to be fair. Right? And it was always that way, really, throughout that period of time. It was great. But like I said, and for me, I guess I was kind of finding my identity. Now you come to think of it, it wasn't a conscious thing. I certainly didn't have the kind of pressures that you had. Like I said, I lived in a really cosmopolitan. I had sort of black friends, white friends. I mean, it just wasn't really a thing for us, to be fairly honest with you. We used to feed off each other's energies and feed off each other's sort of likes and dislikes. So I certainly didn't have any of that, which I'm really pleased that I didn't have any of that. I mean, I saw stuff around me, but that kind of wasn't a thing. I was kind of English and middle, working class English. That's what I was. But I guess I was sort of forming some sort of identity about what the next step for me would be, if you know what I mean. 1982 was a real. It was a transitional year for me. And it served me well.
And you said that you ended up in Christmas by closing the deal on Christmas.
Yeah.
Now you're in a transitional period, which is great because right after Christmas is New Year's, and our next episode is going to be 1983.
Whoa!
Wow! The time goes by fast, and it's always an enjoyable conversation with you because you have so much knowledge. Working at that record store, and we haven't even heard the stories yet. We need some.
No, I know. Well, we'll have to guess. Maybe just do one episode of behind the scenes of a record store.
Because you always have the best customer, and you always have weird customers, and you always have assholes come in retail, right?
I've got so many weird. I've got so many weird customer stories that you wouldn't believe. But we got, there was a bit of sex, rock, and sex, drugs, and rock and roll in there. Definitely. So there are some stories to be had. But
all right,
just quickly, because you started off with the Clash, and I meant to come in and say it then. And I was working in a music store, and I got a call from one of the counters. I was working in a big store, and each of the counters there was like 3 floors. One of the guys phoned me up, and he just said, "Yeah, I've got Bez from the Happy Mondays and Joe Strummer in to see me. Do you want to come and meet him?" and I just thought he was pulling my leg.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, whatever, Steve. Blah blah blah. Ha 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 ha. About 20 minutes I wandered down, and there he was, and people were buzzing, and they were going, "Why didn't you come and see Joe Strummer?" And I went, "What?" Sure as eggs. I looked at the video. There he was with Bez from Happy Mondays. Turns out they both drank down this guy's pub, and I just popped in to see him, and I was gutted. I mean, I was so loved to have shaking his hand, but there you go. So close, but yet so far to the Clash.
Well, before we go, you were going to give us your top albums for 1982.
We've mentioned most of them, haven't you?
Yeah.
Let me just have a
or your top records. I'm sorry.
Well, you said Thomas Dolby. Well, okay, here's one for you that is an album by an American band.
Uh-huh.
So 1982 is almost like from punk to nowhere back to punk again, because my favorite album of that year was an album by a band called Bad Brains.
Okay.
Right? Who were an American band. I think they were New York based, but they were just an amazing thrash punk band. So energetic, but they also mixed in reggae. Now, the reason they mixed in reggae was because it was a purely black band.
Oh, wow. And I never heard of them.
They are, honestly, again, YouTube's a wonderful thing for this sort of thing. And I just got into them because I was in the record store, and I hadn't heard of them before myself. And one of my jobs, because they hated doing it, was, go and put the sleeves out, right? Because obviously all the records were behind, all the sleeves were out, so nobody could nick them. Somebody brought a sleeve up, you put the album in, etc. Okay, so they hated putting sleeves out, and I was always putting Bad Brains in the reggae section, because the cover had a picture of the band. They had dreads, they had whatever. They just looked like Steel Pulse or something like that. And I was forever, and they were always going around going, "Why are you putting Bad Brains? It goes in punk." And I'm going, what? And then I stuck it on, and they blew virtually everything else, any British punk band, out of the water. So there you go. There's one for you to go and have a look at. Watch them live. They'll go in from a 2.5 minute thrash punk metal song, and then they will just chill out and do like a 5 minute dub reggae song, one after the other. They were amazing. They're an amazing band. I mean, very much later down the line, bands like Living Colour and bands like that came from that background. So that was my top album of 1982. It wasn't my top album. My top album you've already mentioned, but we'll give that one as we haven't mentioned it already, top albums, Bad Brains. It's called Bad Brains, and the album's Bad Brains.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. And we can't wait for those stories. It's going to be next episode, guys. Stay tuned. It's going to be story time with the Rambling Man, 1983. Thank you, sir, for joining me again.
Thank you
I can't wait for next week.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as always. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a great night. Take care.
And you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
New videos every Monday and Sunday. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Gen X Gamer. Remember to like and subscribe, click that notification bell, and remember, never ever be afraid to be happy. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.